Velkommen til Genau Talks. Jeg hedder Henrik Johanning, og jeg sidder som administrerende direktør i Genau More. Genau Talks er et koncept, hvor vi sætter fokus på relevante emner inden for produktion af lægemidler, og hvor vi interviewer industrieksperter inden for life science, både i Danmark, Skandinavien og i verden. I've invited John Lee, who is a former FDA investigator in the US Food and Drug Administration in the US, where you've been working from 77 to 83. And after that, you've been working in the pharmaceutical industry as a quality assurance manager and compliance manager. And recently, actually within the last more than 20 years, you've been working as an advisor and consultant for pharmaceutical companies, Europe and globally. I could go to another topic that also related to validation, because before you actually start your validation, you also need to do some risk assessments. And for many years, we've discussed the risk-based approach. What is your opinion about the risk-based approach? So what is it that you see out there?
Yeah, the risk-based approach obviously is a very good tool. Okay? It's a very good tool, okay, to use. What I see out there is that companies are still not properly applying the risk-based approach. What I see out there is that many companies are using the risk-based approach to justify not having to perform something or perform a task that is required by the GMP. And that's where I see the risk. Okay? Because the proper use of the risk-based approach, as I understand it, is you use the risk-based approach to identify potential risk so that we can take preventive action to prevent that from happening, or we use the risk-based approach to identify potential risk to help us enhance the quality of a product and so forth. But in real life, what I see most times that the company is using risk-based approach to justify why we don't need to test this, why we don't need to take this sample, why we don't need to perform that analysis and so forth. So that is a problem area that I've been seeing in many companies. So I see risk-based approach used a lot in equipment qualification, okay, especially in both the installation qualification and operation qualification. And people would use that to say that we don't need to qualify this function and we don't need to qualify this design specification. But if it is part of your design specification, GMP compliance requires you to confirm that you have met that design specification. So that's an area that I'm still having problems with my clients, trying to explain to them that you cannot use the risk-based approach to violate the GMPs. Okay? So my advice to them and to other people is that, all right, when you perform a risk-based approach or when you perform a risk assessment, please make sure you also perform a GMP compliance risk. What is the risk in terms of GMP compliance, even though there is no risk to product quality impact?
So that was your opinion on the concept, and also partly about the risk assessment. The feedback has been that this risk-based approach is used for, as you say yourself, to direct resources into what is seen at or what is actually assessed as being critical. But what you say is that this doesn't actually mean that you don't have to do any proper testing, even though that it's not rated as critical.
That's correct. Yes, because if a certain task is required by the GMP, if a certain test is required by the GMP, you cannot use a risk-based approach to justify not performing that, okay, or not performing the requirements for that. So that's what I mean when I say companies should also do a compliance risk, that if we decide not to do this, then what is the compliance risk? Are we looking at a minor 43 observation from the FDA? Or could we be facing a warning letter citation? Or maybe even worse than that, could we be looking at a product recall if we do not perform this test, if we do not perform that task? So that is an area that I think is still weak. And that is an area that I need senior management to pay more attention to direct their people and make sure that they are using the risk assessment or the risk-based approach properly.
I've seen companies that has been doing what they call an impact assessment. When they start up a potential validation assignment, what they do as one of the first steps is that they make an impact assessment. Is this impact or no impact? Is the process or equipment, is it impact or no impact? And if it's actually no impact, then you don't have to do proper risk assessment. How do you see that?
That's pretty much the same. Okay, direct product impact. We have seen those terminology on that. Okay, this has direct product impact. This has indirect product impact, or this has no impact. But again, it's a good model, but you cannot use that to justify not having to do something just because it has no impact on the quality of the product. Okay, as I said before, it might have no impact on product quality and product safety, but it might have an adverse impact on GMP compliance. And that's the one that we are not evaluating or not including as part of our evaluation.
Speaking about equipment qualification and talking about, in this matter, talking about design specifications, design qualification is a separate issue. So I know that you think that we here in Denmark eventually do it a bit different, and you actually recommend that we do it too early, so to speak, that we eventually have the benefit of postponing it a bit.
I don't know if that's the case here, but the problem I find with design specification, okay, the DQ, is that companies are not doing it. Okay, there's no formal, or they do it, but there's no formal system on doing it. So according to actually European Annex 15 requirement, you're supposed to have documentation for the DQ, okay, for the design qualification. But again, like I said, I think we industry-wide still have a problem figuring out what is design specification. Okay? And this is also another area that I always find to be confusing. To me, design specification is to show that your design specifications, approved design specification, and your approved functional specifications meet the user requirement. That's all it is. Okay, that's the way that's my interpretation. Okay? But sometimes I go to the company, and their user requirement is actually the design specification and functional spec. So what are you going to compare against? So I think maybe we need to go back and maybe re-clarify the difference between a user requirement and specifications. Okay? User requirements should be very general, such as, I want a piece of equipment that does not rust. That's a user requirement. Okay? And then from there, you develop your design specification. And design specification in this case would be that the equipment must be made out of 316 low-carbon stainless steel electro-polish. Okay? And the design, the qualification, the DQ, would be merely to review the design spec and make sure that that design spec would meet the user requirement. So I think the complication there is that many companies, our user requirement is too specific. And in actuality, the user requirement is the design spec. So what are you going to compare against? Because there's no user requirement to compare against. So maybe that's why we don't have a formal design specification the way it was intended by EU Annex 15 and also by the GMP for API, active pharmaceutical ingredients.
Speaking about design qualification, John, I know that something is actually going on when it comes to combination products.
Yes, that's very interesting. So I'd like to add another comment to the importance of design qualification. Okay, I explained the deficiencies, and I like to stress the importance of it. So the FDA finalized a guideline on they issued a guideline on combination product in January of this year. And for all of the companies that make combination product, you can follow the drug GMP and follow some of the medical device GMP, or the other way around. So if you choose to follow drug GMP, which most pharmaceutical companies are going to do, then they have to follow some part of the medical device GMP. I won't go through all of them, but the two specific ones that are very important is, number one, design control for the medical device, and number two, management responsibility. Okay? So I explained earlier, or I expressed my concern about the level of the design qualification and the way that we're doing it or not doing it properly. Well, we need to get a better understanding of that, not just to conform with the requirement for DQ for equipment, but also in order to apply it to design control for the medical device. So what are the requirements, very briefly? The requirement for design control for medical device includes the I forgot. The requirement for design control for medical device requires design input, design output, and design review. Okay, and then after that, you have design verification and design validation, which we're not going to get into there. Okay, so design input, if you read the regulation, medical device regulation, is very similar to user requirements. Okay, user requirements for a piece of equipment, except the design input is for a device, for a syringe, for example. Okay? And then design output is very similar to design specifications and functional specifications. Okay? So you're basically saying, what do I want the syringe to do? I want the syringe to deliver an accurate quantity. Okay? So that would be the same as user requirement. What do you want it to do? And then design output would be, well, how are you going to design it to do that? Well, I'm going to make sure that the barrel is of this length, of that size, of that shape, that color, or whatever. So that's very similar to design specification and functional specification. And then you need to do a design review. Design review is almost the same as a DQ, design qualification. Now you need to review the design output to make sure that it fulfills the design input, which is the same as a design qualification to review the functional and design specs to make sure it fulfills the user requirements. So for companies that make combination product, it is more important for them to get a good understanding of design qualification so that they can also apply this, or it facilitates the application of this to the medical device requirement on design control. The second requirement that we need to pay attention to, companies that make combination product, is management responsibility. In the drug GMP, there is no requirement or regulation or suggestion as to the level of executive management involvement into the day-to-day operation of a pharmaceutical company. The FDA, of course, expects senior management to be involved and have the authority and so forth. And of course, they are responsible, but it doesn't outline what they have to do. The medical device GMP on management responsibility is very specific, that the executive management is responsible to make sure that people understand the quality requirements and that they follow the quality requirements, and they must frequently reinforce that. Of course, they can delegate that to the next level of management. So another area, another message to our senior and executive management in pharmaceutical companies is we need to take a look, we need to review the requirement for the medical device GMP and whether or not and how we are going to fulfill that requirement of management responsibility.
Speaking about audit trail, I know for a fact that a lot of people are talking about how do we actually, no, not how, but when do we do a proper review of the audit trail as part of the approvals for batch release?
That is still a problem area in that we don't have a consensus in the industry. We don't have a standard in the industry or recommendation as to what should be included in the review. And as you said, how do we review and what information should we review? So my personal recommendation, I'm sure there are other recommendations out there because there is no standard yet. My recommendation is we need to go back to the root cause. Why does the FDA want us to review the audit trail? Well, they want us to review the audit trail to ensure that the data is reliable. Well, why would the data not be reliable? Well, the data might not be reliable because someone could have changed it. Someone could have deleted something. So based on the root cause as to why the FDA wants us to review audit trail, my recommendation to my client is that you should only have to review audit trail that involves deletion of data and the modification of data. So I would not expect someone to go and review the entire 50 audit trail for someone who went in and created the file and someone who went in and just read it and logged out. Okay? So we're not concerned about those because those should have no impact on the reliability of data. So to limit the review, because you don't want to sit there and review 50 audit trail to release the batch, I would recommend that we consult with our IT experts to see whether or not they could program the computer to only identify, okay, all the audit trail must be there, but for the review purpose, okay, don't print me out 100 audit trail, but only identify those that involve modification and deletion, and the review should involve the reviewing of those to see whether a certain deletion or whether a certain modification could have affected the reliability of the reported results. So that would be my recommendation on the scope and the extent of the review of the audit trail.
So, and you have this popular saying saying that who did what, when, and why. So this is what you actually need to see in the audit trail.
Yes, that is what we actually need to see. Okay, who, we need the initials, okay, or the name. Actually, we need the full name in order to comply with the electronic records regulation. Okay, that whenever something is in human readable form, it must have the full name. Okay, if it is an electronic signature. Okay? So yes, we need to know who. We need the timestamp, which is a date and time. Okay, when, what did that person do? Create, modify, delete, review, or whatever. And of course, the why. Why did you go in there? Yeah.
Thank you for joining this interview in Copenhagen, John.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to provide an update to this Genau talk. And I look forward to having the opportunity again next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.